just because you have AI doesn't mean you're going to build a good system. You really need to understand the foundation of coding in a very good way. Otherwise, AI will just do whatever it wants.
Welcome to the Bright Commerce Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Bright Commerce, episode 29, How AI and Vibe Coding Are Reshaping the Development Landscape. I have my guest, Russell Bishop from Mass. HelloMass.co is the website, and you can find more information there about work that he does as an Airtable consultant, doing database integration, interface design, automations, and really helping business flow their information better through several systems. That's what we use them for. Very happy to have you on, Russell.
Thanks for having me on, Judd. So just to kind of expand on that, I guess, what the reason for this conversation is. So we had a really interesting conversation recently about your operations stack and what we've been working on over the last few years. And I think it's a really good mirror of what is happening in the industry right now for operational software and how people want to run their internal tools. So our business, Mass, we help businesses build bespoke tooling for their businesses. We do that in low code and almost exclusively in Airtable, which, if you haven't heard of it, is kind of the king of low code tools these days. And that is, as easy as starting a spreadsheet, you can build an application that runs part of your business. And the setup that we had put together was pretty mature. Like, there's some advanced stuff in there, which I'm sure we'll get into. And then over a period of time, something interesting happened. And suddenly there was a new answer to that problem, right? How do I get bespoke tools that work the way that, my business wants to? And I believe over the last few months, you've been building and trying to do that vibe coding as the kind of alternative to low code. And I think it'd be really interesting just to kind of quiz you on how that's gone and what the pros and cons are that you found, and take a bit of a snapshot, on how you've progressed there.
Awesome. Yeah. As you know, we work very heavily into Airtable, and I think this is, a special case on my side because, I do have a team of developers that can build and do things. And I will say in the last 2 years or 2 years ago, or maybe even three, I think it's been 3 years when we initially started, the vibe coding, and it wasn't where it was at now, nor was I mature enough to, I think, dive into that a little bit. And I think today where you can actually have AI help you code and build, let's say, a system has definitely gotten pretty advanced and easier. So, and we're at the infancy stages too. So I've kind of told you I'm taking a 180 turn from Airtable, but it doesn't mean that 180 turn might be necessarily better in the short term, but possibly in the long term. And I think just from a cost for me to personally move quickly on certain things, I think it was easier, where Airtable, definitely needs a person to notice, I think, the intricacies of that and how the interfaces work and that stuff, where I just felt like I was kind of crawling up a hill a little bit, trying to figure that out myself, and figured if I'm going to start doing something, I should maybe do it in the coding stack that moving into. So it initially started with project management tools that we use. So we had FreeCamp, we had Trackabee, we had a lot of different tools going into Airtable. So it all made sense to have one place kind of grabbing all these. And then it started to be kind of like, these are too many tools that are coming into this. There's too many like flows of information. Why do I need all this anymore? I never really liked Trackabee. I never really liked FreeCamp for managing projects. It's like I used 20% of each one of these tools, and I felt like I wasn't, I was just kind of connecting to a lot of places. So that's when we started our own project management system. And then it progressed into, taking the financial stuff that we're doing and bringing it over to. But that's kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah. Let's get into the specifics as well, because I think when we say things like you had a pretty mature setup in Airtable, people out there who are thinking about what their operations stack looks like and how it might compare to what you've built, obviously we won't go too granular, but I think kind of as an overview for like the kind of department views that you had put together, right? So let's say like, top level. So you've mentioned project management, which is your tasks and projects. You've got your finances, and that was part of the integrations work that we've done. Different tools, different reporting is centralizing all of that, and account reconciliation as well, which not a lot of people get to that level as well on per transaction reconciliation. Your sales and marketing stuff was in there as well. So we had some integrations with some call recording tools and your sales pipeline, right down to HR. So like your staff directory, staff cost management. So like across the board, like broadly, it was quite a mature layer, I think there, and quite a lot of use cases that were at play. And yeah, you mentioned integrations. It's funny, in preparation for this, I did a quick recap on all the integrations we put together. There are, 8 services I'm reading that are quite different tools that are all syncing into, the system of record. And I think based on what you're doing right now and what we were trying to achieve, the goal is similar there, which is you want your master data sets. You want your system of record that you trust. This is our clients list. These are our customers. These are the tasks we have. And you want that source of truth. And you're kind of carrying that through now into a vibe coded setup, but instead of integrating with, 7 different SaaS tools that aren't really a good fit for you anymore, the best type of integration is no integration at all, right? So just having all of that data in one place is certainly more efficient looking setup for that. If you gave someone the brief for what you wanted to build, you probably wouldn't say, well, go and buy these 8 different services and link them all together. Like what you're doing, you're trying to build that common system that runs it all. So yeah, I think, from a simplification step and taking a step back from what you were trying to achieve, but how you've done it, I think it makes a lot of sense for the next step.
I think I'll add to that. I think I overkilled it. I think what we put together was utterly awesome but I think my business, I'll give you a perfect example where this would really, really work. One is like, if a large company, usually a large company is not going to sunset a major product. Let's talk, ERP system or their CRM or the POS. There's so many systems that I think are completely integrated in the company, and the last thing they're going to do is get rid of it. It's not going to happen. I think that's where Airtable comes in really handy, is creating that helm, because that's what we called it, the helm, the dashboard, where you can pull in all of that data and then use Airtable to do exactly what you did. So I think the execution was wonderful. I just think that on my side, it became a little too complex, and I didn't use it as often. So, like I had different teams, plugin business, hosting business, agency business. Then I open up, more businesses and, other agencies that deal with different verticals. And I think that's when I started to say, okay, gosh, if I have to duplicate this, or I have to continue to create all these different, channels and these particular tools for all these other new businesses, it's going to be quite complicated and costly for what I need. So that's kind of where I saw it. But I do see like a large company, or just a company in general, that needs to flow all their data somewhere. That's typically, it worked wonderful. And give you another example, like BigQuery, people use Google Analytics, use Google Ads, they use different things. They can use Looker, to maybe create dashboards, or they can get really advanced with BigQuery. And I think that's where, Airtable is kind of the same with your systems. Like you really at one point are going to get to a place where you need to understand, more detailed information, you have to start figuring out more, like in my case, what is a particular brand being made? Because I think there's one point you didn't bring up, and that is I had one bank account originally, but then I opened it up to 3 bank accounts. Now I have 5, but I had 3 bank accounts, 1 business entity, but 3 different brands. And that's what you really did a wonderful job at, because you're able to separate the finances, the expenses, the incoming revenue, the cost per team member that either goes to, one particular brand. But you even made it in a way that, because I have some team members that work on several different things. So I was able to say, okay, he works 20% on Bright plugins, 30% on Bright hosting, and the remainder on Bright Vessel. So then I really got to see, okay, what are my real costs? And that was great, because it showed me that, hey, Bright, like some of my businesses weren't as profitable. Should I spend more time in them? And I started really seeing where the money is flowing in and what I should, focus on. There's stuff I like doing, but at the end of the day, if it wasn't making money, do I want to continue killing myself doing it? And that's where I really felt the system helped me understand a lot of that.
And so tell me about when you got to the kind of planning stage. So you realized, not enough agility in the current tool stack and vibe coding. I mean, I know that you've been experimenting with AI tools for a while, not just, for what you're trying to do, but also on, client and service, experiments and seeing how that can help your businesses. So when it came to that big picture, did you just start with the single use case project and task management, or did you go, okay, here's my map of everything that I'm currently doing in Airtable and assorted tools and work backwards from that? How did you plan it out?
Well, okay, so I reverse engineered a bit. I think first I took the interfaces in Airtable. I'd said, hey, this is what I have, and what my reporting is, what I don't like about it. I use Claude Design to then make that better looking. And then I went and literally just kind of, used Airtable's AI, which by the way, Airtable's AI, not a big fan of. I think it needs to improve. It definitely doesn't let you tell it off either. It gets very angry and you call it a bad name. So but it needs work. It was like, if you ask me, they kind of just shoved AI on top their stuff without really. Actually, I take that back. They added, I think, a lot of good parameters so it wouldn't go off into hallucinate. So they did do a good job that way. But yeah, I kind of used that to, kind of look at how we're set up as a that relational database part. I then fed that in and said, okay, here's my tech stack. I want to use Django, Python, Celery, Tailwind. I said, I want to bring this into my own environment. So, and then that was the start of it. So we're kind of midway through that. The first thing that we had to do is, because we had all these different systems and and I think that was the main decision. It wasn't that things weren't, working well or great. It was more that we wanted to move out of all these systems. I had Vivify for agile development for Bright plugins. I had Trackabee for Bright plugins, two just mediocre platforms. I didn't want to work in that anymore. FreeCamp was our support portal. Managing time was such a pain with my team too, because it was really manually entering everything in, which I didn't like that much. But to just make sure that our time was accurate, not only for us internally for billing, but also just for clients and the reporting aspect of things. And the one thing that was cool is Airtable helped bring all that in to like a project management dashboard, which was great for a year that we used it. It was awesome. But it was from a sharing perspective. And I think adding, people, I think Airtable, one thing it should do maybe a little bit better is, well, one is the interfaces. They got to make that, I think, a little bit better, because I feel like that was a little, cumbersome to work in. But also just the view, it still looked cool, but you can tell it's still Airtable, right? You couldn't, and I know you could, jump in on that on some options. Like, you don't have to use Airtable for your interface. But for us, it was just getting out of that part of things. So removing ourselves from all the feeds coming in, because that was the first thing. Like, if we're going to get out of Airtable, we need to have something that doesn't need Airtable, and that is 8 different feeds, feeding into it. So that we did. Obviously, that saved costs because we're eliminating 8 tools we don't need to use, and then also even tools that we had to use for Airtable, which still not actually sunset totally yet, but that would be Document, which creates the invoicing, as well as FinTable, which feeds in the data from the database, the data from the bank account. One thing I do want to mention about FinTable, and this is something that I was kind of concerned about. The founder of FinTable reached out to me about investing into their company, and I'm like, and I'm thinking to myself, so how'd you see my financials? You know what I mean? Like, that's the one part I was like, yeah, I kind of looked at that, that side of things too. When you're feeding bank stuff back and forth, security there, I thought, would be better off bringing in-house, which the other part of that too is that the feed for financials, like FinTable, I thought, hindsight 2020, like, you kind of, when looking at it now, I see that maybe having just a monthly import from Stripe, a monthly import from the bank account is all I'd have to do. And then I could do, I feel like the feed was cool, but, I just, that also is just another expense I don't think was needed. So that's kind of ultimately where we wanted to go. We wanted to not just to reduce the cost of things, but I think reduce the amount of accounts we had to manage and teams were in, because that was the big pain in the ass for us. So it helped us live normally for a while until we just decided we're gonna take the bull by the horns and move everything. Which, by the way, I wouldn't have done if it wasn't for AI being easy enough. So I think I answered one of the questions. I think the other question was about like the move to that. Well, I think you're about to ask
Yeah.
something.
I mean, I was interested in the plan, but I think you've answered your approach there. Yeah, let's narrow in on the tech stack side of things, though, because I think that's an interesting area for people who maybe don't have as much technical experience. So the type of business that you run, you can tell anyone, off the cuff, what kind of tech stack they might need in order to, build X software, right? You know about hosting, you know about GitHub repositories and how code should operate. So I think it's interesting for us to contextualize that with that. That's kind of a big advantage for you in this situation, because you don't need a lot of guidance and hand-holding for that sort of thing. But just recap there what the tech stack is now for what you've built new.
I think, and I owe this to Mihai, who's on my team. He's pretty much the CTO. Like, we don't really have a lot of titles, but he, system admin. He saw the struggle that we were having for quite a while, and he took it upon himself to really just say, okay, I'm going to take the project management side, and I'm gonna spend about 30 hours or so on it. I'm going to show you a version one and tell me what you think. And that's kind of where we didn't jump into like what you would think of like hardcore planning and putting sprints together. Like, this was fast. So he put together that. He did it again with Python, the Django as the interface. He used Celery, I believe, for the API parts of things. We used Tailwind for the interface to CSS, and he just ran with that. So on my side, I did kind of a similar project, which was called School Tracker AI. And this is where it originally started, because we built a tool for schools for a trade. It was a trade show at 30 days to come up with something special. What makes us special? And there's two or three other agencies there. What makes us special? And I didn't have much other than that we can get, we're really good at enrollment, but that's what everybody says. So I put together in 30 days a complete SEO/AI tool that will allow, people to use both Gemini, OpenAI, as well as Claude to go through a criteria of questions about their website to see if they come up in ranking. And then it would, go through that and tell them what they need to do from an AI perspective to show up better. So it actually would go into the source code of the website through WordPress, it would check the files and stuff that way, not do it through the browser, which is like Moz.com, Ahrefs, and things like that. What that did is gave us way better results. And then also on top of that, I did a feed to Google Ads, Meta, and then did an SEO audit based on the specific pages that convert for a school site, like a preschool, daycare, things like that. And what that did is gave them exactly what they need to see, because, SEO people, they use Moz.com, right? But that doesn't mean like if a owner of a school wants to maybe try SEO themselves, they're going to understand what they need to do, because they need an SEO person to translate that. So that's something I did. And I literally did, I would say, vaporware. It worked. And when I say right before everybody started coming to the booth, I hit enter and I had kind of going and working. I literally worked for a month until the exact 2 minutes before the people start coming to the booth.
Yeah.
And it worked. Everyone loved it. And then I had to come back, and Mihai, my system admin's like, "What is this? What you put together?" I go, "I know it's a hot mess. It's a total hot mess. I know." So I did it in Laravel. I did it in PHP. And he's like, "I do not work in PHP nor Laravel. It needs to be Python." And that's when I started really learning. I'm like, okay, now I kind of get it. Like, you can build now with AI, if you really understand, it's kind of like if someone needs a WordPress site, knowing the best plugins, the best tools to use to make the best out of WordPress, because you have literally 80,000 or something plugins out there, free and paid. If you don't know what to use, everyone's going to say my site sucks or it works bad, or because they might get all free plugins and do that. And I think it's the same thing when you just because you have AI doesn't mean you're going to build a good system. You really need to understand the foundation of coding in a very good way. Otherwise, AI will just do whatever it wants. And for the most time, it likes to cut corners. So, like Sonnet to me is very creative, but it also is very deviant. It lies all the time. Where Opus is more, I would say, in tune to do development. But all of them, you have to be prompt engineering, because if you don't, like every time I'll say, look, I think you cut corners between a scale 1 to 10. Is this up-to-date code following best practices that Elon Musk would not throw in the trash? And it literally, yeah, okay. And it will respond with, yeah, I cut corners here, here, and here. And it's like, so you got so that was School Tracker. I built it wrong like 4 or 5 times in that 30 days to get where I needed. And it was just a half-baked kind of thing, but it worked. Like I did pull in the feeds and it did do what it needed to do. It just definitely was not tenant ready. It wasn't ready for, I would say, multiple new schools or clients. And now it is, but then it took that rebuild process. So I learned a lot there. And that's what started the whole, getting into, let's just redo our project management system. I was like, if we could do this fast,
Yeah, I think that's an important part as well, is that you do need to understand what the output is doing and whether it's time to like keep brute forcing to the output that you're trying to get, or knowing when to step back and make a strategic decision, because the system will just keep on trying to give you the impressive answer in the best way that it can. And that doesn't necessarily mean most technically sound, like most scalable. So, it's people like yourselves who know, okay, we need to have a conscious approach here that gives us better results, because you know what bad looks like. I think that's a really important point. I mean, we also obviously use AI and LLMs to do often like one-shot projects and stuff that are kind of peripheral tools we want to use. And you'll find very quickly that you will spot the kind of junior errors and the like, oh, well, this thing isn't working, so I'm just going to keep throwing stuff at it until it's fixed. And to a novice, they'll be like, oh, it's fixed. Great, let's do the next thing. But we know that actually what you want to do is like prevent that or tear it down afterwards and make sure you've got something that is actually reusable. Otherwise, you just build up a tower of junk.
I tell it to automate itself all the time, and then it will tell me certain things, and you punt, or you're like, yeah, why don't we rebuild that? But there's one, I don't know if this is in the future questions. Let me know if it is, but the cost of AI.
Yeah. Let's go on to that in a minute. I've got a few bits for us to go through, but I think that would be a good comparison for us to do. I think just to touch on the point you made around the limitations with Airtable, specifically around like UI, and also, you mentioned Omni, their built-in AI that you can speak to, is kind of their chatbot, but also it will build stuff for you as well, build interfaces and bases and that sort of thing. Those are kind of a blessing and a curse in the way that I see it. So that gives you guardrails to work from. So out of the box, you start with essentially an easy tech stack that you can build on top of. And the customization is low, which can be seen as a limitation. Like it doesn't look like my brand, or like I just don't like the way this UI works, and I use other tools which feel better to use. But also that's kind of a blessing in some ways, because there are so fewer decisions to be made around, well, how should forms work here? And like, what does validation look like on this? And, all link records need to look the same. So you kind of start with loads of decisions made for you, which is really empowering. But I think what you're describing there is that at some point that becomes a limitation for you, because the thing that helped you start then is the obstacle to what you want to go to next.
Yeah, I think Claude design definitely leveled that playing field a bit, because before I would use AI or build, let's say, interface, and I let it, the Copilot or whatever I'm using in Visual Studio do it, for example, and it would be subpar. It wouldn't be that great. So I found that, okay, this is going back to how the fundamentals, like when you used to build any sort of UI UX, you build the UI UX first before you hand it to a developer. And I think that's the same principle with AI. Like if you're going to build an interface, you first, I would say, do it in Claude Design, create those, that base. And you can do it in a way too that could give, and this is where it's like, I kind of will allow what's in Visual Studio to make the best decision, not, allow Claude Design to make the best decision of what the UI UX needs to be from a coding perspective. I'm always looking for the look and feel. But then when I give it to Visual Studio, for example, and I say Visual Studio because I bounce around, and I'll get to that, why I bounce around from different AIs. Visual Studio because of the cost thing. But when I bring it into Visual Studio and I start to build that interface, it comes out pretty exact. Like it doesn't deviate a bit. I also I also recommend never doing custom CSS or when it comes to design, I learned this the hard way is that it will build a custom CSS very, very bad. And then you're stuck with this whole kind of interface that is all custom and it's not, even though it has global kind of CSS and it has that, but it's a freaking mess. It's not modular. So that's where I really fell into Tailwind, particularly for interfaces, because it follows that CSS approach is better. I forgot the actual term what Tailwind is versus your standard CSS. It's called.
So Tailwind is like a utility-based CSS framework. So yeah, I think, is it declarative maybe? I should know that.
Yeah, I know. I had to look it up too. So the old way is to have your wrappers, your div wrappers and the old just, CSS writing. It's different. It doesn't work with wrappers and things like that. So what it does, yeah, it literally, it's like more like inline kind of code, but it's not inline code. It's like you said. And what it does is I think it makes it for an interface is much better. Like I still think if you design a website, global CSS, with file that has wrappers and follows that semantic, I think it's called.
Yep,
Semantic, sorry. That is, I think, still better for a website. But for an interface that deals with reporting, graphs, things like that, Tailwind is hands down pretty awesome. So if you're building an app that has, like any kind of applications type stuff, I think Tailwind's great. So yeah, I fell into that. And then I made the mistake not understanding both of those when I was doing that school tracker app. That was an absolute mess. So anyway, yeah, I really fell into like, as soon as I start using Tailwind, the interface building became much easier. So yeah, like that tech stack, Python too, I find like PHP's, good, but Python I find to be just better. So I know we use React as well. So that was one of the ones I didn't mention, but React, Tailwind, Python to Django, for example, kind of will help you get to a pretty quick application.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I think one point on the using Tailwind in particular, it makes sense that an LLM would understand well-documented pre-built components and classes better than like a complete free-form language, because that's what CSS is, right? I mean, there's lots of examples out there, but Tailwind is kind of like, here's some framework is the wrong word, but yeah, here's some structure, here's how we use it, and here's a component example that you can use. And lots of React component examples will usually just use Tailwind because it's kind of a global way of of putting your objects and layouts together.
Yeah, what I'll typically do is I'll do a brand web styles guidelines file. So before I do the interface or layout, I give it all the styles too, because even if you start in, let's say, Claude Design, it still may not follow, and you might not even notice it's not following your font size or the way you do stuff. So I think one of the prerequisites is that you definitely want to give it the styles, the brand guidelines and styles first, because that's important before it starts. Because once it does start from that point, I feel like you're not telling it, hey, why does it look like this? Or you got to change this. The edits become a lot less. Also highly recommend README files for like best practices, both for design, best practices, as well as when you get into the development side, best practices on how you want to code. And it's funny, I'll bounce back and forth between Copilot and Claude inside Visual Studio, because I feel like Copilot will give a perfect prompt that I would then feed to Claude that would work better and more efficiently, even though I'm picking Claude and Copilot. Also, Copilot, for whatever reason, costs a ton of money, but we'll get back into that when you ask that question.
Yeah, I think we're almost at that bit. Just one more question then around what the process looks like now. So I guess the development workflow. So if you are identifying a new feature that you want to build out what's the kind of steps and how long, stuff is taking you, and what does that process look like?
Well, when you're doing it yourself, it's kind of fly right by because I think I typically, I try to ask a lot of questions in some ways too. I'm like, well, what is the best way to tackle this? I want to do it, in a good way. And I always say, I always use the term, I don't want to paint ourselves into a corner. So, I would say in the process, some of this, the thing with AI is I'm not an expert in Python, but now I'm building things in Python, if that makes any sense. But, I do have a resident expert that's giving me pointers on use this tech stack, be simplistic, don't do this, don't do that. And usually I think the more simplistic you can make it, and that's like any, I think, code base, the more simplistic you can make the code base and it still do everything it needs to do, the better it is. So that's kind of a rule of thumb that we use when we build. I will say that, we are a web development house. This is kind of new territory for us when it comes to building out applications, but we do have a resident genius that does do it. And I do have team members that love full stack. And I will say the other part of that is I think everyone's getting bored of building websites in WordPress. Just gonna throw it out there. Not really coding anymore, but I mean, like to me, I don't even want to do it anymore. I used to love it. I used to love it. Now I'm like doing stuff like this, and I'm like, this is cool. I'm building applications now and stuff I normally wouldn't be able to do, or it would take me 6 months to do. I can do in 2 hours. So it changed the game a bit. And I also, for my team, I think we want to evolve. We want to evolve a bit because we're going in several different directions. One is going to be, I think, more marketing for schools. We have a brand called Campus Marketing Group, and we have a tool that we built that we're going to bring officially to market, not just in that one trade show. We have a trade show in October. And then we want to build out, I think we have certain clients that ask us certain things. They have Salesforce, they have certain, coding stuff, and we want to get more into more of the back end development of things, building applications. I think, websites have gotten to a place where they used to be kind of like that primary driver in someone's digital space. And I don't feel like that's it anymore. Now people are understanding that they can have different tools, they can use different things. They need to have digital marketing work, correctly. They have to have first party data set up correctly, event tracking. And I think marketing agencies, they fell behind on just understanding how to set up proper reporting. So we've kind of excelled in that area because we have, even though we do marketing, we have certain clients that already have marketing agencies that hire us to handle the particular dev needed for better marketing. So we could do the marketing, but our job is to do this. So we're like, yeah, no problem. We can do that. And actually, I like that because I do hate marketing. I'm just going to be honest. Literally like gambling sometimes, and it sucks, and I hate it. But once you kind of crack the shell, you're like, yeah, leads are coming in, they're happy, and but it's nerve wracking.
It's that unpredictable success, isn't it, that makes it, feel more like gambling than just strategy.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's maybe move on to costs then, because I think that is also something that comes up. I mean, there is an ungodly amount of noise from people talking about how they're using AI and how it's transformed their day to day from the moment they wake up. And one of the things that is the first thing that you'll hear is, impressive thing I built and it cost me, $20 a month for 2 months. And that's, it's one of the deciding factors for a business on what you're going to be building your stack on, is how much those tools cost, not only in our context in licensing, but also in development and working with a partner to build that software for you. So let's start with what it costs to get to the system that we've described, which was based in Airtable, and then we can do a comparison on roughly what, I guess, time and licensing costs now with AI, because I guess that's kind of part of the trade-off that we've made.
Well, see, that's the part, like, what may be a little bit different for me is like, I already have 24 servers on AWS, for example, as well as DigitalOcean. So I pay 3 months or 3 years in advance. So I get like discounted. So the cost of hosting it, I think, is going to be pretty less, but you have to have coding knowledge. Like I will say, like, this is not like you could build something that's not done well at all. And it was just a failed approach. Yeah, and I'll give you an example. Like I started building the financial side because it's the personal side to me, the Airtable side of the finances, and I spent more on accident, probably around $1,000 on Copilot, additional credits, and I flipped over. I have literally ChatGPT, Copilot, and Claude, and I could have just switched to Claude and started to use Claude instead, which I am, and I still haven't even. I feel like Claude. I feel Copilot for whatever reason. I don't know why, costs more. It does work better. It's more efficient. But if you know how to talk to Claude in Visual Studio, because it's more like a prompt, Copilot's really nice. It gives you kind of all the to-dos, what's it's going to do. It's a little more, I think, developer based,
Yeah.
whereas Claude is still Claude. Like it's, still going to go through a bunch of shit. And if you're not watching it, it's going to, it's going to mess things up. So I flipped over, but yeah, just in general.
Okay, so I think it would be helpful to put some context to pricing as well and what the actual cost investment was, not only from cash out the bank, but also time invested. So I did a little report on what we spent not only in development together, but also in Airtable licensing. So a quick rundown for context. So development cost over roughly 2 years was about $24,000. Which averages out nicely at about $1,000 a month. And that equates to about 130 hours in development and obviously review calls and stuff between us. And then, of course, you're paying, so that's just for the working with the partner. Airtable licensing, I think you were averaging around $120 a month was your costs there. So that's just your using the platform costs. So I think that gets us over and around those 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, about $28,000 for that full stack from blank canvas. So give me the equivalent for your investment so far in AI and where that tallies up.
So I'd say for the project tracking system, 2 phases. We have project tracking system and the finance system. The project tracking system, we spent around $4,500 so far. Part of that's AI cost, part of that's teams cost. I would say the time spent on the project management sides, around 70 hours, I would say, of my team's time. I would say on my time, it's probably for that particular piece, maybe 20 hours because it was majority of them doing it. Where on the financial side, which I'm primarily working on using the best practices that my team did and provided, I've worked about 60 hours so far. The cost on my side, I just want to reiterate too, is that my cost went up heavily because I have 4 different Visual Studio windows up and I'm just hammering Copilot. I think people need to understand cost has gone up. So I've spent $1,000 in 2 weeks, for example, on Copilot. I've switched to Claude and started really diving into how can I game the systems because I have 3 different accounts, OpenAI, Claude, and Copilot, and how I can work together on those to build projects. So I think, probably, the remaining part's going to be my side, but if we had to put it into a cost, let's just give it, a rounded number of like $10,000 to migrate both the project managing side, all feeds and accounts we used to have, as well as the financial parts that we use Airtable for.
Yeah. And I think the other, generous view on this as well is that you have or are going to sunset quite a few other subscriptions that you have. I know a few of those were, bought a few years in advance and that kind of stuff. But those costs will also, that will play out probably this year as well, which is interesting. And that balances with the time invested. You've got to choose someone or 2 people in your business to commit time to building it yourselves, and that's time not on client stuff. And as running a business, time in the business versus time working on the business. But yeah, okay, I think that's a really interesting comparison of where the effort goes.
The really cool thing though is quite possibly the application we're building might be something that could be packaged up and sold later. So that's another key part of this that I've always, like when I think of open source, whether it be a website, I would never use Shopify. I would never use stuff that it's not my system. And I think that's kind of, I broke that rule with Airtable. It worked for 2 years. It did what it needed to. And also, one thing I didn't bring up too is I was in the process of thinking, trying to figure out how much my company was worth, as well as how much budgets are. And just, it was worth that investment to figure all of that out. because I learned a lot about my company that also I couldn't do probably on my own. And then, building out the system we have now, I couldn't have done without Airtable either because, and with what you've done, Ortiz, I wouldn't have been able to do that either because I didn't necessarily know even how to go about that before we even met. I had money all over the place. I had different brands. And as that kind of all came together, I figured out, okay, this is how I need to operate my business moving forward.
Right. Shall we do a bit more on, I'm interested in the migration stuff just because it's a kind of more of a techie look at things, but we do a lot of data migrations when our customers are moving platforms. So obviously we're moving people into Airtable, but in your case, I'm imagining that with a lot of the use cases you're bringing in, were you taking data out of Airtable to seed the new system, or were there some cases you just decided to blank slate it?
So here's the crazy thing is that, I created Airtable API key, and the system directly communicates to Airtable on how best to build what it's building. So it will look how, what data is already in Airtable. So it's pulling the data from Airtable. So, instead of let's say exporting stuff, Airtable has a wonderful API. So I was able to just pull data directly from Airtable and kind of allow the system to learn, what's going on over there to help me. So that definitely made things a lot easier, which I did do a lot of exporting of how things are built. Spent a lot of time doing that. And then all of a sudden, because I'm using Claude, and this is funny, but it makes me seem dumb, but I'm using Claude and I'm like, where are you pulling this stuff at? I'm pulling it from Airtable because Claude was already connected to Airtable. So that's a cool thing too. Mention if you use Airtable, the CRM that you set up, I still use. Probably may still use the CRM with Airtable. Was great because I allowed Claude to attach, go to my emails and my calendar, and then would go to Airtable and it would go and show who I've met with, disposition each lead, mark it if I met with that person or what the outcome was. And it was automatically updating my CRM as well. So that part, I think I still may stay, with Airtable with the CRM because it works great in that aspect.
Yeah. Okay, so that migration is really interesting though, because you just essentially what you're doing is let the AI figure it out. Like you don't really need to come up with a strategy for how we're going to transform data from this model to this one. It's just here's where you're pulling it from and here's where it's going.
Yep.
And it sounds like the context of the data it was pulling also helped build out understanding the features that you're trying to achieve. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I'll let you know how that goes too, because I'm mid stride into that. So hopefully, the first go is going to be pretty close and not like my school tracker first go. So, but yeah, it's definitely been a learning experience. It's exciting because when you're like when when you're managing clients and you're not doing building, which I really truly love, I felt like I got back into something. I got into this business in the first place, so it really brought me into like the love of what I do versus just calls, meetings, and just the problems of your day-to-day agency life, so.
You're not the first person to tell me that. Someone with a technical background who isn't doing tech stuff anymore, this is such a good opportunity to like get in the Lego box and just start making things and having fun again. Yeah.
I think at heart every developer or stuff like person like me and you, they're creative, whether they paint, whether they do that, and when they can't be creative, they're miserable.
I wouldn't call you miserable, Judd.
Yeah, no, I'm doing much better. A little ways back, I was having some tough time.
So I think maybe just to close out our chat here, I think, we're aware that what is possible today is very different to what the outlook was like a year ago and a year before that. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how these, comparing these different options, low code, no code, buying SaaS, vibe coding, where they all play out and evolve to. And I think we can be confident that every one of those streams is going to add more sophisticated AI over time. So we should definitely do a kind of revisit on this, 6 months time, a year's time, and see what else you've learned in that. And we're probably going to be having a conversation that we wouldn't recognize now about the capabilities you've got. Yeah. Any thoughts on where this is all heading?
Man, I think we're at the very beginnings of a whole nother revolution in IT. I think when you look at the .com era, which I went to college right when the dot-com era was peaking, like in the 90s. Right when I get out, it didn't peak, it crashed. So like the jobs that I was going to get were gone. So I had to learn how to do freelance, and then it peaked again, like 2005, 6, Google came out. And then I think for a decade from 2010 to 2020, it just kind of stayed stagnant for a while. Everyone's kind of in their lane doing their thing. And then AI, everything's going to change. So I think, you need to embrace the suck. Some people think it's bad and all that. I'm like, yeah, in a lot of ways it might be, but, unless you embrace it and kind of say, things change very quickly and be okay with that, I think you'll be ahead of the game, and also not be afraid to change. And, for your business to change and do things, you got to take some risk. And, I feel like, the Airtable it worked very well for me. I learned a ton. So I look at just the transition into being something that my business needed. And because of my developers or all people that can work in the system, it's like I have a team that can actually, make the system better and improve it every day. Why not just unleash it to them and let them do that? So we have a little suggestion box. And like before I put it in Slack, like a suggestion box, no one ever used that channel for a whole year. Now, like within the system, people are making suggestions or clicking on where they're at, the suggestion. And now I'm like, even the code base is going to be influenced by the whole team.
A lot of the reasons that people get stuck into low-code tools and vibe coding is about empowering the people in your business, right? And making them feel like they've got more autonomy. So it sounds like you've unlocked something there that has brought out that motivation in the team again, and they feel like part of the solution, which is really important.
Yeah. And everyone wants to work on the stuff too. They're like, can I jump on that one? Can I jump on that one? I'm like, well, yeah, hold on. So I'm trying to think of like, all right, now, what else can we build? And I think that's the part. I think, as a business, start innovating. Like you have the ability you have a great team, you have a smart team. If you're going to just build web, like I'll just give you an example, like a web development agency, you're just think, I'm just gonna keep doing web development. You're going to be gone soon. Like you got to go way out the box and start looking at, hey, does my client, what are their pain points in any of the digital space, and start asking those questions. I think by asking those questions, you'll start, introducing services you never even had or thought you would do in the past. Because with AI, there's the abilities there. So I think it was funny because I have a friend that we were discussing a lot of cool stuff that we might be able to do, and he's like sending me his email. I'm throwing in an AI, getting the response, throwing it back to him. He's doing the same thing. I'm like, look, you realize we're like two puppet masters and our puppets let's stop doing this and maybe kind of discuss this really. Cause but the responses are exactly what I would say. It felt weird, cause you're like, I'm like this with my little puppet.
You start wondering who the puppets are in that situation.
Yeah. At this point, it's cool. Yeah. I'm looking forward to figuring some stuff out. I think you're going to see tons of new products out there. That's the other part. That's be cool.
I think you're right about taking the time to experiment with this, because the investment to just try out one of these tools is so low, and you'll find yourself quickly inspired about how that will change your services, right? Once you don't really understand it until you've done it. Same with most software like this that tweaks, what people are capable of doing. It's once you start playing with it and then it unlocks, oh, right, I'm thinking in a new way now, and I've got all these new things that I can produce that I couldn't do before, which is exciting. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay, Judd. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, it was great.
That.
Thank you. Conversation. Me too as well. That will conclude episode 29, how AI and vibe coding are reshaping the development landscape. I hope you enjoyed my time with Russell. You can go to his website again at hellomass.co. See you next time.